The Mitre, more specifically the Mitre Incarnon, is one of my favorite incarnons in the game. Now you may be asking, why the Mitre for a video? It's so random. Well, I haven't made a video on this weapon before, and the Mitre is one of the most asked builds on my live streams, so I thought, you know what? Why not make a video? In this guide, we're going to go over why I love this weapon and why you should give it a try. It's amazing at clearing pretty much anything and also has a very unique augment that makes it arguably one of the best weapons against the Corpus faction. But there is a huge but with this weapon. At the moment, the Mitre is a buggy mess, so DE, if you're watching this video, please fix the Mitre. The Mitre is a saw blade launcher in a sense, and is supposed to have innate 2-meter punch through on the charged shot. It no longer does that. Not only that, it is completely unaffected by punch through mods. Even worse, it has completely lost its ricocheting mechanic against enemies. It still ricochets when you shoot on the ground and walls, but not with enemies. The tap fire does still work with the ricochet mechanic. So this weapon currently in its base form is not performing the way it should. The incarnon form, however, is working as per normal at the moment. So this most likely will be patched, but until then I would recommend running the incarnon version. However, I am still going to treat this video as if it works as per normal, so when they do fix it, you can just follow the guide. Alright, let's hop straight into it, shall we? Don't forget to follow me on Twitch to catch me live. Firstly, let's talk about the base weapon. The Mitre is an MR6 weapon that can be farmed relatively early from the boss Krill and Captain Vor on Exeter, which is on series. However, this weapon low-key has terrible drop rates and is a pain to farm. So I wish RNG to be on your side, my lovely tenno. Now the base version isn't actually too bad for the star chart. If you are a newer player and looking for a decent weapon, then the Mitre is a good option, and it's handy to get anyway as you will be needing it for the incarnon form later on as you progress in Warframe. So it's worth farming regardless if you decide to use it or not. If you do want to use the Mitre as a beginner, well, we are going to go over all the characteristics and stats this weapon has, and then we will be going over a beginner build. If you are a late game player watching this video, after the beginner section I will be going over the incarnon form for Steel Pass players, so this video will be split into two, catering for everyone. So, the Mitre is a saw blade launcher effectively. It has two fire modes, a quick shot which rapid fires the saw blades, and a charged shot that deals more damage, more status chance, and is supposed to have punch through while ricocheting to nearby enemies, but until they fix that, it unfortunately isn't working as intended. The Mitre does primarily slash. The slash weighting is a lot higher than the other status effects, and it actually has really high status chance for a charged rifle, and okay crit chance and crit damage for the base weapon. However, the incarnon form allows you to increase this weapon's critical chance drastically with the evolutions. It is important to know that fire rate reduces the charge time of the charged shot, making it a lot quicker to use, which means you deal more damage. And the saw blade's projectile speed can be increased with terminal velocity, a super nice quality of life mod for this weapon. Now, as a beginner who is using this weapon in its base form, how would we go about modding this for a budget build? Well, we would mod for flat damage, always in star chart, so we use serration. We then use a mod for fire rate, as this will help us to charge our charge shot a lot quicker, thus dealing more damage. And then we mod for point strike and vital sense to increase our crit chance and crit damage. Now the reason we do this, even though this weapon is focused more on status chance, is because if you land a headshot crit, the slash procs will be massive, which will pretty much delete anything in the star chart. Because of the slash being the highest weighting, it's really easy to land a headshot crit that applies slash, which will of course inflate your slash proc damage a lot. Now these 4 mods alone are enough for a super early game build, especially if you are running low on capacity or you haven't leveled the weapon entirely yet. This should suffice, especially if they fix the bugs with this weapon. Remember to try get your serration to rank 6-ish and max out all the cheaper mods that have been placed on this build. If you, let's say, really like this weapon and you get more capacity, we will then need to add multi-shot. But here is the thing, Split Chamber is a mod that gives you 90% multi-shot, which is really good, but again, we don't have much capacity as a beginner, as this mod takes 15 capacity at max rank. So I would recommend trying to get your hands on Vigilante Armaments, as this will increase your multi-shot by 60%, and will also give you a slight chance to enhance your crit hits. If you manage to invest a former or two and you have enough capacity, you can then change it for Split Chamber. Multi-shot also increases the amount of blades per shot. Because the Mitre is primarily slash, we would benefit a lot from running viral. So, we can make use of an unranked Malignant Force mod and an unranked Cold mod. Now, why unranked, you may ask? Remember, the numbers you see here on the left with the different status effects don't equate to your damage. What it actually is weightings. In Warframe, statuses have weightings, meaning the status effect with the highest weighting, i.e. the highest number, has the highest chance of proccing. So this applies to all modding, even to late game players. So if a weapon has very high slash weighting, you always want to make sure viral has a lower weighting, as slash has unlimited slash procs, whereas viral caps at 10. If you can get your hands on rhyme rounds as you progress, you can also place an unranked rhyme round to make viral and benefit from the extra status chance. For the last mod, it's your choice. You can use terminal velocity, or you can use a bane to increase your bleed damage over time. This is what the final build would look like for a beginner. Remember, if you are super early, you can just run the 4 mods I discussed earlier until you get more capacity, and then you can add more mods as you go along. Now, there is one more thing regarding the mitre which is incredibly important to talk about, and that is its exclusive mod called Neutralizing Justice. This mod makes the mitre one of the best weapons to use against Corpus. Why? Neutralizing Justice gives you 90% chance to instantly kill a nullifier bubble. What is the worst enemy of the Corpus faction? Nullifiers. We all hate them. They are a pain, and especially with the incarnon form, it's amazing to use the mitre against nullifiers. So if you're going up against the Corpus faction, it is highly recommended to run this mod. Now you're probably wondering what Justice is. Justice is a Steel Meridian Syndicate buff that is activated when you gain 1000 affinity. It does have a 30-second cooldown, and when triggered, it will apply 1000 blast damage to all enemies within 25 meters of the player. You will also recover 25% of your maximum health and gain 15% armor for 30 seconds. So I mean, it's alright, but it's not something too crazy. You can use this mod as the last slot for the beginner build as well, and that pretty much concludes the beginner section of this video. Before we go further, if you could smash that like button, it really goes a long way for me. Thank you so much. Now let's move on to the later game players who have farmed the incarnon form. The mitre has an incarnon form. For those of you who do not know, it's basically a pack-a-punch system in Warframe that makes weapons a lot better to use and gives them a cool form and makes them a lot stronger. You can farm incarnon adapters in the steel part circuit in Deviri. You will need to farm the respective resources in Deviri. In the mitre incarnon's case, it turns it from a saw blade launcher into a homing projectile that applies heat and seeks out enemies while ricocheting to nearby enemies. It also does a 3-meter AoE explosion when it hits enemies, applying heat, and turns the mitre into a fully automatic gun. The nice thing is, it is really easy to charge your incarnon form with this weapon, especially with more multi-shot, as the more multi-shot you have, the more discs you shoot out per shot. So let's discuss the evolutions. For the second evolution, I went for Swift Saw Blades. This will increase our base damage and increase our fire rate with a channeled ability. The reason we don't go Plentiful Mayhem is because the multi-shot consumption is terrible and it's just not worth it at all. For Evolution 3, I would suggest running Projectile Speed. And for Evolution 4, you have 2 choices, Commodore's Fortune or Critical Parallel. I went for Commodore's Fortune, but Critical Parallel works well too. I personally find the status chance to be already high regardless, so going full crit doesn't hurt. Now, how do we mod this weapon for the end game? Well, I have 4 builds for you today. The first is a viral build, focusing on our damage over time. The mitre incarnon does more than enough flat damage. This thing is disgusting in its raw damage department. So modding for damage over time is already a massive bonus and will pretty much shred everything. I've gone to level cap with this weapon multiple times, and every time it has been amazing. We use Galvanized Chamber for more multi-shot, Critical Delay and Vital Sense for our crit, Speed Trigger for fire rate, a Bane of your choice, Rhyme Rounds unranked, Malignant Force unranked, and to finish it off, we run Rifle Elementalist so we can increase our heat and slash procs just from this mod alone. Remember, the mitre does mainly slash, and with the incarnon form it does heat, so it's basically 2 innate damage over time effects. It will do heat regardless of what you modded for. This is our viral build right here, focusing on our damage over time. Now, if you're running, let's say, Nourish on your frame, or you simply don't want to armor strip, then I do have a corrosive version for you, which is very similar. Now, I do want to touch on Galvanized Aptitude with the mitre. This applies to all of the builds shown here. Galvanized Aptitude actually multiplies the damage with the incarnate form. Remember, it won't affect the AoE damage that comes from the projectiles exploding when it hits an enemy, but the projectile's damage will be multiplied by Aptitude. So it's your choice if you want this mod on. It is very good, especially if you're wanting to run endurance runs or just general gameplay. It's a huge damage increase, and you don't really need to run a primer with it, as the mitre already applies quite a lot of status effects, although you can min-max by using a primer. It is your choice, you can decide what you want to do here. When it comes to the arcanes, I would suggest running Primary Merciless or Primary Dexterity. I prefer Dex as the stacks have a longer duration. For For the Exodus slot, you can run terminal velocity, but it's not required as the evolution already increases projectile speed. Please, like I say in every video, if you don't have the fancy prime mods, just use the normal variants to make it a budget build. You do not need primed mods. We then move on to this weapon's specialty, Corpus. Fighting against Corpus is always a pain, but they are weak to two things, magnetic and neutralizing justice. Now why magnetic? Well, magnetic has been reworked. You now deal increased damage to shields and overguarded enemies up to 325% damage. You will also disable shield regeneration, and when their shields or overguard breaks, you will deal electricity damage for 3% of the enemy's maximum shields. This percentage of damage is increased per stack when it breaks. You will also gain a forced electricity proc. So yeah, you are applying magnetic and electricity at the same time. We also have Neutralizing Justice for nullifiers, and this build follows a similar framework except we run a Bane. Now you can, if you wanted to, also just run flat Toxin, that does work, but to be honest, I find magnetic to be nice because it's not limited to just enemies with shields, it is also enemies with overguard. For the last build, we have a Blast setup. Blast works really nicely with this weapon, and I've decided to actually go a Corrosive Blast setup. However, you can drop Corrosive if you're running a frame with an armor stripping ability, so keep this in mind. Here is what the build looks like. If you drop Corrosive, you can run a Bane as well as Aptitude to increase your damage even more. You can increase the Mighty's damage drastically by running Raw on your frame, or Nourish, or Eclipse. Raw is my personal favorite as it's just a really nice all-rounder. The nice thing about the Mighty Incarnon is that it just goes with pretty much any frame and loadout. It's one of those weapons that it just carries itself and does more than enough damage and doesn't need any buffing. For my final thoughts on the Mighty, personally, it's amazing. It's super satisfying and allows you to kill groups of enemies. This weapon comes in handy because of the ricocheting bullets bouncing around seeking other enemies. It allows you to just mag dump or spray a bunch of bullets into one enemy, forget about them, move to where you want to go, and then the enemies around you will just slowly die as the bullets are just bouncing around everywhere. It also helps with CCing enemies because of the ignite and electricity procs from the magnetic build. Like I mentioned earlier, the flat damage from this weapon is unreal and it just holds up so well. This is the incarnon form, of course. Regarding the base version, I hope they patch the bugs at the moment soon. Just look for a pinned comment or I'll put it in the description. Final verdict is, if you're wondering if it's worth farming for on the circuit and investing a bunch of form, the answer is yes. Very much so, you won't regret it and it will do all content Warframe has to offer you. If you liked this video or if it helped you in any way, don't forget to smash that like button as it really helps, and consider subscribing for more content like this in the future. As always, a huge thank you to all of our channel members and a special thank you to the lovely Villa, Caden the Bagul, Trum Trum, Shakiro, Darwin, Gilbert, Ayrton Yard, Tythrax, and King Wonderbread. Thank you all so much, you guys are amazing. Alright, I will see you all in the next one, my lovely tenno.